We are glad to welcome you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I know that the guests who arrived to cover the Russian-Arab summit have already been here for quite some time and have had the opportunity to familiarize themselves with the sights not only of Moscow, but also of a number of other Russian territories. The situation that led to today is well known to you. The summit was prepared a long time ago, but when it became clear that this week, including today, when the summit events were supposed to begin, would become decisive in advancing the agreements on the Gaza sector. Agreements that our Egyptian friends actively promoted. Qatar, President Trump, undoubtedly put forward his plan, which we have repeatedly assessed as the best thing on the negotiating table today. Although, of course, the Palestinian problem is not exhausted by this, but nevertheless, to stop the bloodshed as soon as possible, to resolve the most acute humanitarian problems of the population. Now thousands of Gazans are returning home. How they will live there, I cannot imagine. But nevertheless, it is better to engage in rebuilding one's own homes than to constantly be under shelling, to live daily under the threat of death to one's children, one's relatives, one's loved ones. Therefore, we sincerely wish success to today's event, today's summit meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, where, as I understand, more than 20 countries from the Arab world and a number of Western states are participating. I hope that all agreements will be fulfilled, although we hear both from the ranks of Hamas and from Tel Aviv statements that not everything is over yet and there may be relapses of the crisis. I believe it is very important that those who initiated this forum, first of all President Trump with the support of the presidents of Egypt, the leadership of Qatar, Turkey, prevent such variants of events from developing, and instead focus on the need for an immediate ceasefire. Compliance with the line that was agreed upon for the withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Gaza sector, establishing humanitarian aid, and, of course, restoring this wonderful place on earth, which, probably, has suffered more than any other territory in the world in the post-war years. And, of course, long-term settlement of this situation is possible only through the implementation of UN decisions on the creation of a Palestinian state. We have noted that in Donald Trump's peace plan it speaks only of the Gaza sector. And there it mentions statehood, but in quite general terms. And it is necessary to specify these approaches, including determining what will happen on the western bank of the Jordan River, because the UN resolution assumes the creation of a single, territorially integral Palestinian state within the 1967 borders. Well, there will surely be more questions about how we see the development of this situation, but I just wanted to emphasize that we remain committed to implementing these decisions, as does the overwhelming majority of the international community. So, taking into account the agreement to hold today, at the beginning of this week, a special, most important event on the Palestinian issue, President Putin agreed with the Prime Minister of Iraq, as chairman of the League of Arab States, to postpone our summit. I am sure it will take place as soon as it becomes clear what dates are most convenient for it. The final documents are almost ready, so we will still have the opportunity to meet with you when you come again, I hope, for the summit itself. Well, and our relations with Arab friends, they are steadily developing. The League of Arab States has proven itself and continues to strengthen its positions as one of the key pillars of the emerging multipolar world. It authoritatively and actively participates in world affairs in the economy, finance, and more often contributes to resolving regional and, on a broader scale, political problems. We have steady growth in trade turnover with the League states. It has already exceeded $34 billion. Yes, this is not much compared to the trade turnover with Arab countries that the United States and the People's Republic of China have. But this figure of $34 billion is several times higher than the volume of trade turnover that existed 20 years ago. So we are on the right path. I dare to assure you, the growth dynamics are very good. We have many projects that concern not only energy, not only oil and gas processes. We cooperate, as you know, within OPEC+, within the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. But not only. More and more countries in the region are interested in our experience in the field of nuclear technologies, nuclear energy, non-energy applications of nuclear energy. And, probably, such a flagship project is the construction in Egypt of the first atomic power station in that country, El Dababa. Agriculture, supplies of our food, our fertilizers are of great interest to our Arab partners. and, undoubtedly, humanitarian cooperation has traditionally been established since Soviet times with many Arab countries in the field of education. Thousands and thousands of students from League countries received education in our country and continue to study on the basis of annual quotas provided by the government of the Russian Federation. Tourism is growing, moreover, in both directions. And our citizens traditionally visit your countries with great pleasure, your wonderful resorts, and more citizens of Arab countries come to the Russian Federation, which we are very, very glad about. Large-scale projects in the field of culture are being implemented to popularize music achievements in this area of our countries. Russian seasons receive a very good response, which are held in a number of states, primarily Gulf countries. But this experience is in demand in other areas as well. Well, and, undoubtedly, we were very pleased with the participation of representatives of Arab countries in the International Song Contest in Tervision, performers from Saudi Arabia. The United Arab Emirates, Egypt took part in this music festival, which took place on September 20th and received a very good response. And, as is known, our Saudi friends have already invited this contest to them next year. We will try to support this initiative in every way and ensure worthy Russian participation. So I am concluding my opening remarks. We have accumulated very good experience over the last 20-odd years. This experience has allowed us to adopt the best from our relations from Soviet times. Let me remind you that the Soviet Union was the first state to recognize, in particular, the independence of the current Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the experience of those historical contacts undoubtedly helps today to more confidently rely on the achievements already attained for building relations for the long term. Not everyone likes the partnership between Russia and Arab countries. There are those who want to play colonial games again, divide and rule. We know perfectly well who we are talking about. These habits have not disappeared anywhere. But nevertheless, the fundamental trend is the development of mutually beneficial relations based on mutual respect, consideration of each other's interests, and building a solid balance of these interests. Please, your questions. Maria will moderate. Yes, please.
The first question is about today's event, which is the most relevant on the international information agenda today. Undoubtedly, the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. And such a question. As you have already in general terms expressed skepticism regarding the possibility of the success of this format, well, my question is, how do you assess the success of this ceasefire agreement? Can it turn into a full-fledged peace process between Israel and Palestine? And is Russia intending to participate or join this process? And a supplementary question. I reviewed again the list of those countries participating in the Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit. And today more than 20 countries at different levels, at the level of leaders, at the level of ministers, and even at the level of embassies. Even the ambassador of Japan was invited to this summit. Why is Russia not participating in this summit, although Russia has always played an important mediating role in this conflict, both within the quartet and even in the current conflict, in bilateral relations with both Israel and Hamas, and took positive part in the release of some hostages? Why is Russia not in Sharm el-Sheikh today?
I can only note that the invitation was sent by the hosts of the summit. This is the leadership of Egypt, which, as reported, coordinated its actions with other Arab initiators, but primarily with the United States. By the way, the Prime Minister of Iraq is not invited to the Sharm el-Sheikh summit either, although Iraq is currently the chairman of the League of Arab States. As for the Japanese ambassador participating there, well, in my opinion, US Vice President J.D. Vance has already said that Gaza needs to be rebuilt. And the main burden, as he emphasized, the United States hopes that the main burden will be borne by the Arab countries. Well, Japan is also periodically involved in rebuilding territories that have suffered as a result of military actions. Probably, there is some sense in this too. As for Russia is ready to participate in any formats. You mentioned the quartet. The quartet, which was destroyed by the efforts of the Biden administration, and which nevertheless ensured very serious agreements, including the agreements of 2005. No. Earlier, in 2001, when the quartet's roadmap was approved in the UN Security Council, which spelled out in detail all the steps necessary for the creation of a Palestinian state. The process was supposed to be completed within 1 year. The quartet introduced this resolution. The Security Council approved it unanimously. What happened next is known to us. And several more similar initiatives met the same fate. I won't even mention the Madrid Principles of 1991, the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, which were welcomed by all and led nowhere. Therefore, when you ask, music, regarding the prospects of today's event and the prospects of all these efforts in general, which we actively welcome, the President said this the other day, speaking at a press conference in Dushanbe. Of course, skepticism, as you put it, remains. Too many times these hopes for peace, for the prosperity of this region of the world have not come true. Moreover, as I already mentioned in my opening remarks, we hear such skeptical forecasts from different sides. I just read that Benjamin Netanyahu said that far from everything is over. Israel still has many enemies, they all need to be finished off. So this can be called skepticism or aimed at continuing offensives against those whom Israel considers enemies. Hamas. There were also discussions there about how these agreements would be implemented. Who should take the first step? But thank God, some hostages have already been released. Now it's Israel's turn. The IDF seems to have withdrawn to the agreed line. And we very much hope that everything that was agreed upon will be fulfilled. If the direct participants of this summit and those who will deal with this issue, the implementation of Trump's plan after this summit, consider that Russia can be useful, I assure you, we will not refuse. But imposing our services is not in our tradition. That's why we wish this summit success, first of all, so that the Palestinian people can breathe freely.
Yusum Temami, representative of the Iraqi channel Al Ikhbariya, the official TV channel of Iraq. How do you assess Russia's role in ending the bloodshed in Gaza? Especially considering that Russia opposed and denied the horrific events that took place in Gaza and tried to put an end to them. How did Russia influence Hamas?
We have tried to influence everyone in one direction, in the direction of rejecting violence, developing agreements on coexistence. This is inevitable. Compromises in any conflict. Agreements to stop the bloodshed, this is a compromise. Every country must make concessions. The fact that Arab countries, and this was manifested in the initiatives of Egypt, Qatar, Islamic countries, Turkey. Following the Arab-Islamic summit, Arab countries are ready to seek compromise. They have proven this. And I very much hope that the other side, our Israeli colleagues, with whom we are also in constant contact, will understand the need to seek precisely a balance of interests, rather than setting goals that would mean eliminating any threats to your existence, regardless of what your neighbors think and what arguments they have. Therefore, a complicated situation, but I mentioned again that the root of the problem is still the lack of progress in creating a Palestinian state and even more so, the presence of growing regression in creating a Palestinian state. I remember when I worked there, it was, perhaps, 25 years ago, I spoke with Israeli colleagues and quite informally tried to simply understand how it is possible, how to find a way out of this situation. And I kept telling them in a friendly, human way, that the main risk for the region, for Israel's security, including the security of other countries in the region, is the unresolved issue of implementing UN decisions on creating a Palestinian state, for almost 80 years now. At that time, my Israeli interlocutors said that this is an exaggerated position, an overstatement. And if you think that way, it would mean encouraging terrorists. But precisely the unresolved issue of the Palestinian state is the most significant factor fueling the preservation and strengthening of extremism in the Arab world. Of course, yes. Remember the outrageous terrorist attack on October 7th, which we immediately condemned in 2023, and after that several times, when Israel began its operation under the slogan of destroying everyone. I remember, their Minister of Defense and some other members of the cabinet from such radical figures said, in response to calls to do everything to spare civilians in Gaza, there are no civilians there, everyone is an extremist, starting from the age of 3. I remember this very well. But then we submitted resolutions to the Security Council 5 times. The United States vetoed these resolutions under Biden, but the collective punishment of Palestinians continued. And if we are talking about extremism, imagine that not a single generation, no generation in that same Gaza sector lives under blockade, occupation, blockade of normal channels of communication with the outside world. And how do you think parents raise their children in Gaza? Have they been raising them all these decades? What did they tell them when a child asks, Mom, what was here before? Who is my grandfather, grandmother? How do you live? Who is in charge here? And so, these children, and in school, of course, they will receive corresponding knowledge there too. And someone wants these children to grow up in a state of immense happiness for the fate that was prepared for them. Therefore, there is no escaping without a Palestinian state. The issue must be resolved. How to do it? That's another question. But mutual concessions cannot be avoided here, because if, well, Trump's plan mentions Gaza in the context of forming Palestinian statehood, while the West Bank is not mentioned at all. And if you look at the map of the West Bank, then beyond the illegal settlements, practically nothing is left. Well, I even heard somewhere that someone says, we need to make 2 or 3 municipalities there for the Palestinians. This is not a state. And I don't think that creating municipalities or some quasi-state structures will be considered in the Arab world, and first of all by the Palestinians, as a satisfactory outcome of this nearly 80-year drama. Here compromises will have to be made. I have no doubts about that. Well, and of course, the West dragged its feet on this issue, did not want to use its levers to accelerate the creation of a Palestinian state. Otherwise, the quartet's roadmap I mentioned, 25 years old, would have been implemented, and we would already have a solution to the problem. Well, I already mentioned in June, when there was another escalation in the Gaza sector, a humanitarian catastrophe without involvement. And then President Macron, then Prime Minister Starmer, someone else in the Netherlands, I think, started saying, that's it, we will go to the UN and at the General Assembly recognize the Palestinian state. This was in June, and the General Assembly started in 3 months. But if you decided that the state needs to be recognized, why wait 3 months? Or did you hope that by then there would be nothing left to recognize? That's why everyone here must abandon double standards. And, I read today one political scientist who says that the West does not need an independent Palestine. The West needs a mandated Palestine again. One would like to believe it, but by some signs, the actions of a number of our Western colleagues, including the British, they are generally heading in that direction. Therefore, the summit, I am concluding my answer to this very important question. The summit that starts today in Sharm el-Sheikh, and it is already being convened on the basis of a compromise platform. The initiators have already proposed a compromise, and now we need not to tempt fate, but to clearly fulfill everything that was proposed, which will allow stopping the bloodshed, solving humanitarian problems, and beginning the restoration of Gaza. But in parallel, without delaying, we must proceed to developing the next plan, the plan for creating a Palestinian state.
First of all, I want to introduce myself. I work at Al Jazeera TV from Algeria. Several recognitions of the state of Palestine have occurred, and we hope that the Palestinian people will still be able to achieve security and independence. There are also questions about Western Sahara. They concern, in particular, our country. What is Russia's position on this issue, especially in light of Rabat's attempts to establish administrative control by Morocco?
The position is very simple, and it is the same for all similar cases. There is a decision by the United Nations, primarily its Security Council, on how to resolve the Western Sahara problem through the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. And this problem has been with us for, I don't know, 50 years, probably. I remember the former U.S. Secretary of State Jim Baker was once appointed Special Envoy of the UN Secretary-General for Western Sahara. I was working in New York then. He came, met with Security Council members, held separate contacts with permanent members. And then everyone confirmed the principle enshrined in the Security Council resolution on holding a referendum on the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. Moreover, no one even doubted that this should be done, and they were mainly engaged in agreeing on criteria when elders should ensure fair voting rules for different parts of Western Sahara. That is, the scenario for conducting this voting was already being written very closely. Then the situation changed, and we know that Morocco, without renouncing, by the way, the principle of self-determination, believes that this self-determination should be realized in the form of autonomy. For us, such a variant of resolution will be acceptable that satisfies all parties. And such a variant was enshrined in the UN Security Council resolution. By the way, the United States went a different way. And even in the first term of the Trump administration, they recognized Western Sahara as part of Morocco, as I understand. For them the issue is closed, but for us the issue will be closed when not only one side, but all involved parties truly feel that a solution has been reached on the basis of an honest balance of interests. The Security Council resolution is the only thing there is now. If a new resolution is developed that lays other principles at the basis of the settlement, we will be ready to discuss such initiatives with the understanding that they will be acceptable to all countries.
Hello, from Bahrain. Thank you. Sergey Viktorovich, tell me, please, is there a prospect of cancelling the visa requirement for Bahraini citizens to visit the Russian Federation? Especially since these days we are marking 35 years of diplomatic relations between our countries. Thank you.
I was surprised by your question. I was sure that we have a visa-free regime with Bahrain. But if this is not the case, it means this is our omission and the omission of our Bahraini friends. Here sits my deputy Sergey Vershinin, who is responsible for this direction. I ask him to personally sort out why we still have to obtain visas from each other with our friends. We have excellent relations with Bahrain in all spheres without exception. Bahrain is also a partner country of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Bahrain's attractiveness for tourists is obvious, just as the attractiveness of the Russian Federation for Bahraini subjects is. I think we will resolve this issue. Yes, please.
I am from Al-Ikhbariya channel of Iraq. How are trade economic relations between Russia and Iraq developing? Today there are certain mechanisms that Moscow and Iraq have adopted to continue relations. And the second question is your assessment of the development of the situation in Iraq and what role the North-South corridor plays now in participating in the corridor project for Iraq's development. Thank you.
We have traditionally good relations, and we played, I believe, a very constructive role after the Saddam Hussein regime was overthrown. Our Western colleagues, led by, including those who showed the vial of poisonous substances, which turned out to be toothpaste. And Tony Blair, by the way, is being mentioned again now in the context of the process that is starting in Sharm el-Sheikh, the Peace Council. Some technocratic body will be created, as Trump's plan suggests, to manage the Gaza sector during the restoration period. Tony Blair is reminded. Well, he has not been dealing with Middle Eastern affairs for the first year. He was one of those who immediately demanded to start military actions against Iraq, to overthrow Saddam Hussein's government under a pretext that, as it turns out now, was fabricated, and he had to admit it. But I remember, then I was also working in New York. It was a very tense situation, a tense time it was. In the end, I am very glad that after all the experiments that the Bremer administration carried out with Iraq, when they simply banned all structures somehow connected with the Ba'ath Party, and these were all the state-forming structures of Iraq. And it is no secret that many officers of Saddam Hussein's army formed the backbone of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, simply because they were thrown out onto the street. And now, I believe, the government of Prime Minister Soudani and his predecessors are very effectively, competently, without abrupt movements, restoring national consensus, which, of course, is necessary for a country like Iraq, as well as practically for any other country in the region, be it Libya or Syria. And our AA companies have long been working in Iraq. First of all, I will mention Lukoil, a number of other oil-producing companies. They pay a significant share of taxes, ensuring the stability of the country's economic development. And to a certain extent, considering that our companies operate in Arab Kurdistan as well, to a certain extent they help create the material basis for that very national consensus. Well, but we have an intergovernmental commission in operation. We communicate regularly at all levels. Well, I mentioned the recent phone call between Prime Minister Soudani and President Putin. My colleague and I are in constant contact. We met a month ago at the UN General Assembly session in New York. We held good talks. So I think we can be quite satisfied with how our relations are developing and set new goals that will be in the interests of our peoples.
Mona from Qatar, independent journalist. I have two questions. The first about Iran. The second about Palestine. On Iran. Is it true about Iran that Russia hindered the implementation of the agreements on the Iranian peaceful atom? Did Russia supply Iran with S-400 systems? On the second question. To date, there are no measures against Israel, whose actions led to a large number of victims in the Gaza conflict. What is your position on this issue?
What does it mean Russia hindered the agreement on the peaceful atom? Can you repeat? The first question. Zaev said that in the past Russia thwarted attempt to revive the nuclear deal during Rouhani's tenure. Is this really true? So Zaev said. And did Russia supply Iran with S-400? And what about the deal with Sukhoi, the Sukhoi aircraft? Have they arrived in Iran? Well, as for our military technical cooperation with Iran, after the Security Council sanctions were lifted, we have no restrictions whatsoever. And in full accordance with international law, we are engaged in supplying the equipment that the Islamic Republic of Iran needs. And all this is done, I repeat, within the framework of international legislation. As for Javad Zarif's statements, we worked with him for a long time on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And the final decision on this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was made by him directly with the then U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. The other participants in the negotiations of the final stage did not participate, but simply observed how the United States and Iran, in the person of Javad Zarif, would agree. And the fact that we never deviated from position in support of this very nuclear deal, including Security Council Resolution 2231. This is known to everyone. I don't know what Javad Zarif meant, but what happened the other day, when the West and the Security Council staged an unlawful, outrageous spectacle and stated that after this spectacle, UN sanctions against Iran have been restored. The pretext used by the West was a so-called snapback mechanism, which is unique to the Security Council resolution, because it essentially assumes that any country that wants to reinstate some sanction restrictions can initiate this process single-handedly, and no one can prevent it. This is exactly the scheme that was ultimately agreed upon. And Javad Zarif personally agreed on this scheme directly with John Kerry. But we were surprised then, honestly. But if our Iranian partners themselves were ready to go for such a formulation, which was a pure Western ambush, of course, we did not object. I understand why Javad Zarif supported such an exotic formula. Iran did not intend to violate the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and was confident that no one would knock it off this path. But it turned out that Iran did not violate it, while the United States withdrew, and Europe did not fulfill its obligations, and then they started saying again that Iran should make new concessions. But, I repeat, if you mention Javad Zarif, this is his creation. And Sukhoi, and there was also about Palestine. On Palestine. Well, you know, we just discussed this quite in detail. The legacy that has accumulated in the region after the decision to create Israel and the Palestinian state. This legacy has become more and more explosive. And after the October 7th terrorist attacks of 23, Israel responded, as I already said, with collective punishment of the Palestinians, which, just like terrorism, is a gross violation of international humanitarian law. The hatred that is being sown there from both sides is, of course, off the charts. Therefore, here we need not to talk about Israel saying, we will destroy Hamas and everything will be fine. Your question suggested the logic. We need to pressure Israel and everything will be fine. It won't work that way. Just as Hamas is, whatever anyone says, part of Palestinian society. So all the politicians in Israel, including the radically minded ones, not just the moderates, they are also part of Israeli society. And we need to negotiate between them. Seek a balance of interests. And the great powers are, of course, called upon to use their influence on all participants in the conflict precisely to encourage them toward a balance of interests. And as President Putin said the other day, we see that President Trump is guided precisely by this.
Hello, Sakama Yusuf, Syria. Mr. Minister, now, as everyone knows, Syria is experiencing violence and even genocide in various parts, particularly on the Syrian coast. We all saw this. Collective killings are taking place there, kidnapping of children, women, and similar horrific things. What is Russia doing to put an end to such horrific practices and convince Ahmed al-Sharara, the president of the transitional period, to address this problem? And how are we cooperating now with Ahmed al-Sharara after he came to power? The second question. What is the future of the problems related to Bashar al-Assad? Now it is known that he was allegedly poisoned in Moscow. Is there really such a problem? How is it being resolved?
No. Well, his stay with us is for humanitarian reasons. He and his family were threatened with physical destruction. We all remember the fate of Muammar Gaddafi, which so delighted Hillary Clinton, who watched his physical destruction live and clapped her hands. And we, purely on humanitarian grounds, provided asylum to Bashar al-Assad and his family. And he has no problems with living in our capital. No poisonings have occurred. If such rumors appear, well, I leave them to the conscience of those who spread them. As for Syria, and indeed, in March there were very, very alarming events. And we provided, by the way, our Khmeimim airbase for civilians and some Syrian army servicemen to protect them from the rampage of violence that was then provoked. How can this country be calmed? You know, we have never pursued any special interests of our own in Syria. And when we were together with the Syrian people, we always advocated for Syria, as a multinational, multi-confessional country, to rely again on national consensus, on promoting national consensus. So it was all the years when Bashar al-Assad was president of the Syrian Arab Republic and when the United States was essentially leading to the split of Syria, when they fueled Kurdish separatism in the northeast of this country in every way, creating problems for Syrian society and for neighboring Turkey, and indeed for other countries where there is a Kurdish minority. We never engaged in this and always advocated for the immediate reunification of all Syrian territories. Now, after the change of power in December last year, we are also guided by precisely these considerations. We are convinced of the need for all countries in the region, a region vital for world stability, for all countries in the region to contribute to the full restoration of Syria's territorial integrity, which is still being tested in the north and northeast. Well, lately in the south, when Israel began to demand the demilitarization of Obaida and all territories south of Damascus, but this already directly affects the issue of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is no joke. And, of course, we support the actions of the new authorities aimed at calming the situation. And in this vein, first, we organized back in January of this year a trip of an interdepartmental delegation to Damascus to conduct an inventory of the relations that by that time we had with the Syrian Arab Republic. Then there was a phone call between President Putin and Mr. al-Shara. Then in April, I met with Foreign Minister Shabani in Antalya at the Antalya Political Forum. And then in July, Mr. Shabani, together with the Minister of Defense and a number of other government officials, came to us in the Russian Federation. And just recently, in September, a couple of weeks ago in New York, I met with Mr. Shabani. We have a common understanding that the basis of relations that was built over many years remains relevant, with the understanding that some adjustments will have to be made, reflecting the new situation in Syria. This is primarily economic issues. This also concerns our military and military-technical cooperation. The Syrian side is interested in preserving our military bases in Tartus and Khmeimim. And here, as the President has repeatedly said, we rely on the interest of the host country, the Syrian Arab Republic. It is clear that under the new conditions, these bases may play a different role, not just as military outposts. And, in particular, considering the need to establish humanitarian flows to Africa, these can be naval and air bases that serve as humanitarian hubs for directing humanitarian cargoes there, including to the Sahel-Saharan zone, other needy countries. And yes, but I was talking about contacts. And in the first half of September, a large new delegation headed by Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak was in Damascus, held the most thorough negotiations. So we are updating and adapting our contractual legal base and our cooperation practice to the new conditions. And here we see mutual interest. How many more?
Thank you very much. Mrs. bin Mohammed from Tunisia. The Russian-Arab summit will discuss, among other things, economic issues related to Russia's support for Arab states. Will the issue of partnership and investments between Russia and Arab states be discussed there? Which of these countries and in which spheres? Secondly, we know that Africa holds a special place in Russia's foreign policy. What is Russia doing today to strengthen its position in the states of North Africa, including in Egypt, including in Tunisia? Thank you.
We have with Arab states, as I said in my opening remarks, steady progressive growth in economic ties. This concerns trade and, of course, investment cooperation. If we talk about trade, we cooperate on global hydrocarbon markets within the Gas Exporting Countries Forum and within the OPEC Plus format, where a monitoring committee operates on a permanent basis. Its co-chairs are Saudi Arabia and the Russian Federation. Well, And from other areas of trade exchanges, I will highlight the supply of food, including halal products. By the way, grain and other food products, fertilizers, in which our Arab friends are very interested. Tourism, I already talk about it. Industrial cooperation. There are promising projects in the field of nuclear energy, including the use of nuclear technologies in medicine, agriculture. All this is in quite active development. Well, and I will mention cooperation in the financial sector. The Russian Direct Investment Fund with its counterpart in Qatar, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf countries, in particular, not only plan but already implement a whole range of joint projects for co-investment in the Russian Federation on terms that bring very good profits to our fund, naturally, and to our Arab friends. Hey, so was there anything else in this question? Everything. The economic question. Yes, we have good prospects.
Mr. Lavrov, hello. How do you view the creation of an international body to monitor the ceasefire in Gaza? Is Russia playing a mediating role between Baghdad and Kuwait on the issue of Hor al-Obaida? And is it planned to introduce visa exemption for Kuwaitis, as was done for Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries?
I already answered your colleague from Bahrain. We are interested in easing the visa regime as much as possible. If there were no requests from our Kuwaiti friends to introduce a visa-free regime, we will check. And in the presence of such interest, I see no major difficulties here. Relations between Iraq and Kuwait are gradually, I believe, normalizing. This was a not quick process, and certain difficulties remain, which were recently considered at the UN Security Council. Following this consideration, an acceptable decision was reached and adopted. So I think that in the future, the Security Council, with our active participation, will contribute to achieving the final and complete normalization of relations between Iraq and Kuwait, both of which are our good friends. As for Gaza, yes, the second about Gaza reform. Well, yes, I understand. Well, Donald Trump's plan, as it is called, which everyone now assumes, in addition to the release of hostages, the withdrawal of Israeli forces to certain positions, resolving humanitarian problems, also assumes the organization of some management of the Gaza sector during the restoration period. There's unplowed land there. We see footage daily of completely destroyed streets, squares. Yes, in general, the entire space, all living space is destroyed. How will this international body be structured? I understand that the Peace Council, which the U.S. President himself will head, will be such a trusteeship oversight council. And directly on the ground, some body will wake, consisting of technocrats who will coordinate, not least, I note, financial flows, because the Americans have already said that Arab countries will have to take on the main burden of Gaza's restoration. Everyone has their own function, division of labor. Well, but the most important thing is that those fragile formulations contained in Trump's plan should not be subjected to revision by anyone. And such attempt we already hear from different sides. And in Israel, there are figures who declare that all these agreements do not prohibit Israel from resuming military actions at any time. There have been quite a few such statements already. Well, Hamas believes that Israel is trying to clarify something retroactively, to specify, and opposes this, stating that Hamas accepted Trump's plan as it was presented. There will be many such maneuvers now, around this document. Therefore, it is very important not to stir up passions and not to provoke some new escalation, but for everyone to focus on the literal implementation of the agreements on withdrawal, release, including the release of Palestinians. Of course, we will contribute to this in every way. Please.
Mr. Minister, yesterday, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi spoke about the need for UN trusteeship over the upcoming stages of Trump's plan. How can work be activated in this direction, in particular, in the UN Security Council, especially considering that in the past it failed to achieve success in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? And how do you assess the cooperation between Russia and Egypt on regional problems? How do you assess Egypt's role in these issues?
Well, Egypt's role is obvious. It is one of the most active mediators in a number of conflicts. A country whose leadership takes initiative in a number of directions, as is happening now. And right now, today, literally in Sharm el-Sheikh, when President el-Sisi will co-chair with President Trump. With the support of Jordan, Qatar, Turkey at the event, on which we all place great hopes. And our relations with the Arab Republic of Egypt are exemplary, I would say. In the economy, We are building the first atomic power plant in Egypt. Again, in the economic sphere, logistics, infrastructure, a Russian industrial zone is being created in the Suez Canal zone. This is the largest project aimed at creating a hub for trade with many adjacent and even non-neighboring countries. We have a rich history from Soviet times. As you know, many key industrial facilities in Egypt were built with our country's assistance. Education, culture. I mentioned the participation of an Egyptian performer in the Intervision Song Contest quite recently. Well, and the closest, yes, of course, the Intergovernmental Commission works regularly, develops new areas of cooperation, looks at where the processes of implementing agreements require additional stimulation. Well, and, of course, in foreign policy, Egypt is one of our key partners in North Africa. We have good and friendly relations with everyone in this region. With Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. And I very much hope that in Libya, too, that very national consensus, which is so lacking there, will be achieved. Please.
I am from the international channel Al Jazeera of Algeria. Many Arab countries, many African countries, including the Sahel region, fear that there is an Arab-African core there that could influence the internal affairs of those states. And what do you think? Is this possible? And is it possible that the African core will commit crimes against the peaceful population, as happened in Mali? Thank you.
You wrote it all down carefully. You conscientiously read everything that was there. You know, the Africa Corps is a unit of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. The military do not commit any actions against the peaceful population, against civilian facilities. This is well known. If suddenly your editorial office or those who asked you to raise this topic have facts, they need to be presented, because the whole point is precisely in attempts today to accuse Russia groundlessly of anything of the gravest sins. And as for what you said, that the Africa Corps is in some countries neighboring Algeria, and there seem to be some concerns arising. If you mean Mali, then in Mali our Africa Corps is working at the request, at the invitation of the legitimate authorities of this country. We know about the frictions that exist between our friends in Algeria and our friends in Mali. These frictions are related, let's call things by their names, to the colonial past, when the colonizers simply divided Africa with a ruler, straight lines, cutting the places of residence of ethnic groups. As happened in the southern part of the African continent, Rwanda, Burundi, Tutsis. And in the case of Algeria and Mali, it happened with the Tuaregs. And this legacy constantly breaks through in the form of one or another conflict. I do not rule out that those who drew these borders with a ruler sometimes even try to provoke an escalation, because look at the map of Africa, there are so many artificial borders there. And the African Union at one time, after decolonization, considered the issue of making this border demarcation more logical, so as not to cut ethnic and confessional groups in half. And then a decision was made not to do this, because it would open Pandora's box. And these conflicts that occasionally flare up now would then engulf all of Africa. This was a very wise decision by the African Union. We are in contact with our Algerian friends on the problem you just mentioned, on the issue of relations with Mali, and in contact with our friends from Mali. And both are interested in us somehow helping to smooth out the contradictions. We are ready for this. Last question, please.
Hassan Faki from the Republic of Lebanon. First and foremost, to what extent is America currently engaged in the issue of peaceful settlement in the Middle East? And as for the continuation of the unipolar world in the world, we know that Russia is trying to change this. How are you, preparing to transition to a multipolar world in the Middle East? And what about what we hear every day in Lebanon regarding Israel's violations in Lebanon of Security Council resolutions and the deployment of peacekeeping forces there? You said that on October 7th a terrorist attack occurred. However, what Israel did over 2 years of killings, is this not terrorism? Thank you.
I, of course, do not consider October 7th to have been a terrorist attack. We are now talking about Israel's position. You have the right to your own opinion, but the murder of more than 1,000 unarmed, peaceful civilians who gathered to sing songs or something else. And this cannot be called anything other than terrorism. And if you listen to me carefully, then I said that Israel's response, which took the form of collective punishment of the entire Palestinian people, is no less a violation of international humanitarian law. Well, as for your question, I didn't quite understand what you asked about American plans in the Middle East. They, in my opinion, are precisely implementing these plans now. And we wish success in this endeavor with the understanding, of course, that the plan will be fully implemented, that in the middle of implementing this plan, the goalposts will not be moved again, and the rules of the game will not be changed. And we already see such wishful thinkers. And, of course, when it is fully and in good faith implemented, we need to immediately move to the practical aspects of creating a Palestinian state, seeking specific compromises based on decisions approved by the UN Security Council. As for the multipolar world, this is not something we are creating in the Middle East or someone is trying to create. This is an objective historical process. The Gulf countries, look, over the last 40 years have sharply increased their weight, economic, financial, political, and immediately gained opportunities to influence many processes. This is one of the naturally formed and continuing to develop poles of the multipolar world. The same is true for the African Union and the sub-regional structures in Africa, which are now actively working one way or another and building up their potential. The same in Latin America, the same in Eurasia. And, by the way, our concept of Eurasian security architecture assumes the participation of all countries and all organizations of the Eurasian continent, the largest, richest continent of several greatest civilizations that have existed for many millennia. And among them, of course, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Arab states of the Gulf, and ASEAN, and many other structures that are somehow part of Eurasia. I am sure that for the League of Arab States, despite the fact that most member countries are in Africa, there will be a place for cooperation here. So the multipolar world is an objective reality. And the sooner our Western colleagues recognize this, the sooner they will understand that it will no longer be possible, as in the previous 500 years, to rule the whole world, declare wars, enslave, exploit, destroy, exterminate. The sooner they realize the need to take their not dominant, but equal place in the new world order configuration. Lebanon, yes, undoubtedly, Security Council resolutions must be implemented. We closely monitor what is happening in Lebanon. Resolution 1701 has in no way lost its relevance. And I remind you, it assumes a refusal of any military operations, withdrawal of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon simultaneously with the withdrawal of Hezbollah forces, withdrawal of Hezbollah forces north of the Litani River. And, of course, violation of Lebanon's airspace, other violations of its territorial integrity are prohibited and unacceptable by this resolution. Little of what I listed and what Resolution 1701 requires has been fulfilled. But this does not mean that we should throw up our hands. We must try to help our Lebanese partner. One of the most suffering peoples in the region, from a Middle Eastern Riviera, Geneva, as it was called, it turned into a country constantly gripped by crises. And we are ready to contribute to overcoming this situation as well and normalizing the environment. Thank you very much.